Okay, so please welcome our first speaker, Mikio Braun. Mikio has a long history working in search and recommendations, but his history goes back to being a researcher. I think you've written a PhD on kernel methods.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Then he joined Zalando, leading search and recommendations there. Worked at Get Your Guide, and nowadays he works as a freelancer, supporting teams to handle machine learning as teams. And in his talk today, we will hear more about growing and scaling search teams. Right?
Yes, thank you very much, René. Yeah, so it's also nice to see some of my former colleagues. So this might, so I had to remove all the, no, all the insights. No, that's of course a joke. There are no inside information in here. But you might see like where I first used this this graph here. So, okay, so growing search teams, right? So this will be about, let's say you started with a search team and at some point you want to add more people, but how to do it. And there, I don't have a solution for that because I think it's very complicated, but I hope I can give you some pointers and some ideas and like a framework how to think about it. So one problem with, I think, search teams, which is very different from many other engineering topics, is that the systems are just technically very complex, right? So if like you have the actual search engine, you have data coming in, you have some kind of query processing, maybe you have sorting, results and all of that, and then there's a whole lot of stuff you can do here, and it's technically very integrated. Right, it's different from, I think, if you have a website and a database and so on, it feels like it's a bit clearer, like how you could separate these things. But with search, it's very complicated, and it also has to be that way to be fast, right? So, and the question is how do you? So there are additional challenges there if you want to split that up. So why do you want to grow a team? Always a good question, I think. Sometimes you just want to grow a team because there's money. But or because somebody wants to have a big department, but of course this is not a good reason, right? So the reason why people want to grow a team is because they want to be faster. So they say if you have more people, we can do more stuff at the same time. Maybe also have some people really just look at things which take a lot of time to get right, like the robustness of the platform. And then of course there's always this idea that you want to have people who can work on something in parallel, right? But this is, of course, very difficult, as you know, right? So especially if it's essentially like one system, so how do you organize teams in a way that they don't get in the way of each other? Okay. So one thing how not to do it, I think, is also that was for me an interesting thing. So I think the first idea is when you have sort of the architecture diagram, and then you think, okay, we have one team for each of the component, right? So you have like a query understanding team that does with that part of the pipeline. Maybe you have a spell checking team and so on. And for me, this also sounded very natural, but the problem is that if you do it like this, right, then very often, like anything you want to do becomes a multi-team project, right? Because if you say, want to fix this one thing, so we have to do something on the query understanding team, the search engine team has to do some changes, and then we have to do some changes in the front end, right? And then because the way teams are organized these days, so within one team, it's easy, but if there's another team, you always have to align, and then you need like a project manager and all the stuff. So I did this, right? So I'm not saying, so I also made this mistake, I think, as probably many of you, but this is, so I did it and it was very painful, and you can sort of make it work, but it takes a lot of additional time. So the question is, like, what is a better way to do that? And I didn't write this book, obviously, but it's a book I found that I think when I read it also like formalized a lot of the insights and ideas that I had actually growing a search team. And I think it's a very good book that yeah, will help you hopefully think about this in the right way. Okay, and the basic idea of in the book is that sort of, and not just in the book, I think that makes a lot of sense, is that then most of the work in a team should be possible independently, right? So if you look at everything that a team wants to do over the next half year or so, then most of that work, it would be really great if most of the work would just be within the team. So the team can, think about it, talk, discuss, like what do we want to do next, and they can just do it. They don't have to wait for somebody else to provide a bit of the work, right? They're not blocked by somebody else. So this is just the dream, I think, which is very hard to achieve. Okay, and the way they call it, so they call it a stream-aligned team. That's sort of the idea, and this metaphor with the stream is, so you have the stream of work, right, or the flow. So it's a water metaphor, like in so many things in engineering. And the idea is sort of, you have all this work coming in, right, and the work should flow. So the team should be aligned to the stream, it should not be blocking the stream or something. And this idea actually goes beyond even like what you often hear, like feature teams, right? A small team that tries to deliver one feature. So it's not just about like a feature or a certain customer persona or customer problem. So it could be anything, as long as the stream of the work, like if the team is aligned with the work that it's supposed to do, then we talk about this. So it becomes a bit clear. I have examples later, like how you could split this actually up. Okay, and the basic idea is how to achieve it. So one idea is to be okay with duplicating stuff, just so that teams can become independent, right? So if you have a typical website, like in the monolith case, you sort of have maybe some front-end code, the back-end code in a database. And then, so in the worst case, many teams are working on it and they have to talk like how to organize the work, how to align on stuff and so on. And then you can say, and this is like, I think what this microservice re-architecting often tries to achieve is you're going to split the stuff, right? So each team now has its own front end, its own backend, but maybe still a shared database. And then already they can move more independently. And like in the world, not in the worst, if you take this to the end, you could even say, why do we have a shared database? Each team should just have sort of its own database if it's needed, if it needs it, and then the teams just talk over APIs and everything is fully decoupled. Right. But the problem is, of course, so the further you move down here, the more complex it gets, because every team also needs to maintain a database, and you need to have like people who understand all these different technologies in a team and so on. So two things that become important, I think one is cognitive load. So they say, so independence is good, but then the other problem is cognitive load, right? So the more technologies you have, the more complicated things become. And then it becomes harder and harder for the team to do anything. So they're sort of independent, but they also have to do everything by themselves, which is not good. And then the other problem is, of course, so the more people you have, again, right? So there's this 2 pizza rule idea that as long as you can feed the team on 2 like big American pizzas, then the team size is still good. So 5 to 8 people. And if it gets even larger than that, then again, it becomes more and more complex to organize these people. So this is sort of, right, so it's like very often in engineering, it's like different forces, right? So you want to be independent, but also if you want to become independent, you start having a lot of stuff you have to take care of, a lot of technologies, and this makes it more difficult to become independent. And another aspect of all this is, so if you think about the communication patterns, right? So if you have 2 teams, the people in the team, usually they're very tightly coupled, but what you want to have between teams is that you want to have loosely coupled teams, right? So if you do it right, then they actually don't need to talk that much. And then there is also, you can already see, so 3 people, this many lines of communication, 4 people is already more, and that's the other part of it. Okay. So now the team topology, like the whole book, it's not a very thick book. But anyway, so the core message is, they say there are like 4 different types of teams, and trying to explain this now. So the basic team, as I already said, is the stream aligned team. So this is like the default, right? So you have a team that tries to do some work, and ideally that the way the team is set up and defined is such that it is aligned with the work that's coming in. But as I said, so the the more you try to be independent, the more difficult things get. So all the other teams that you have is some form of supporting team, right? So all the 3 other team types are there to make sure that the cognitive load of the Streamline team is somehow manageable. Yes. So the first type is this enabling team. So enabling team is like an internal consultancy that tries to help teams learn something that they need to do, right? But you shouldn't have like all the different teams trying to figure out how to do it, but you have this one team that goes around, meets with the other teams, and then tells them and teaches them how to do the stuff, and then they can move on. Another type, a bit more detail here. So another idea is to have a platform team. So if there's a technology that's used by many teams, you have one team that tries to package this, that you can use it like a self-service product. And sometimes when that's not possible, you have this complicated subsystem team, which is a bit more like a classical component team. So you have a team that has something that's very complicated to manage, and then everything that needs to be done on that is done by that one team. And the differences is also how these teams interact. So the stream-aligned enabling team, they have this facilitating working mode, right? So they come in, they work with the people, they help them. Platform and complicated subsystem could or should ideally be like an X as a service, right? So X is whatever the team provides. And the last version here is this collaborating. Yeah. So I have another view of this, which is a bit more text heavy. So the different team types. Again, so stream-aligned team, steady flow of feature delivery. This is the main goal. Ideally, no hands-off to other teams so that they can quickly react to feedback and improve what they're working on. Right, enabling teams, internal consultants, help team with technology topics they need to learn, and they track the state of the art in their area of expertise before other teams need it. So one example here, I think also from the book, is SRE, right? So if all the teams, if they start managing their own services, they also need to know how to be robust, how to deal with failures and all of that. And then instead of like each team trying to figure that out on their own, there's this team that meets with the teams and then does workshop with them and helps them to get good at this stuff. The platform team, right, creates self-service products other teams can use, focusing on reliability and usability, proactively looks out for the needs of the other teams. Yes, and the complicated custom team is the sort of, these are very similar. The main difference is the working mode, right? So this is more like an internal agency trying to reduce the cognitive load for stream-aligned teams and correctly prioritize and delivers upcoming work based on the needs of other teams, right? So if you have, so let's say, so I'm coming to what all of this means for search in a few minutes, but the general idea, so you can have like a search engine either as a platform team or as a complicated subsystem team. And the difference is here, it's really more like a self-service product. You have the website, you can go there, you can configure stuff. And here it's more like you talk to people, what they need to do, and then they do it. Okay. And I think usually, so the big difference, or I think what's also really a value of this framework is that the focus of the teams become much clearer, right? So usually, if you start now with some teams, right, usually you don't grow from zero, but you already did some growing and then you think, is this really the right way to do it or not? What you often see is that the teams are a mix of these things, right? So there might be a team that is both stream-aligned and actually a complicated subsystem team. So they're working on something themselves, but sometimes other teams also come to them and say, can you do this one stuff? We need you to do this one change and so on. And the problem with that is that sort of the goal it's not clear anymore. So the team wants to do something by themselves, but at the same time, they are also this internal agency, and this causes friction within the team, which is not good, I think. So in all of these other types, except for the stream-aligned team, right, the goal of the team is really to help other teams. It's not to do something on their own, but they're really measured by sort of how happy the other teams are, right? And then if you have this complicated subsystem team, ideally, right, so they really try to understand, okay, who has what, how much work is it, and how important is it, how much do they need it, and then they say, okay, this is the best we can come up the order in which we do stuff for the other teams. Okay. Yeah. So as I said already, so so this is just like a slide to show what the different types of stream alignment can mean, right? So they call it in the book, they call it fracture planes. And this is sort of different aspects, how you can cut up and say, okay, how do you define what these work streams are? And they don't always have to be user personas. So the first time I heard about these ideas when we discussed a reorg was actually about customer problems, right? And I think that's maybe what you usually do. So you say we have customers come to our page who want to do this thing, and then there are others, and then you have different teams focusing on these different parts and trying to solve the problem for the customer. But that's just one thing. Right? Another example that they say is regulatory compliance, right? So sometimes there's something which you just want to put into one team because there are different regulatory requirements. So if you handle like credit card data or something, you just need to have all that work in one team. Another sort of fracture plane might be change cadence. So there's some work that needs to happen quite fast, other work that happens quite slowly. So you have that in different teams. Another important one, I think, is team location, right? So you also want to have teams who are able to work together, although I think that changed a lot with all the experience now we made with working from home and so on. Okay. So, but what does all of that mean for search? And so while doing this talk, I mean, this is a kind of exercise I already did a couple of times in different projects. And I thought, okay, what have I actually learned? And I think what I've learned is that there is no single solution. So, but I think what you can take from this is it's more like a process, okay? So there's no one size fit all. There's no, so if I say, okay, this is how you organize the search team, actually it might not work for you because the question is really, so what is your stream of work, right? What are the things you want to focus on the next 12 months? And this might also change over time. And then you should ideally reorg your teams so that they can work on it. So it might be that, so you start setting up the teams in some way to solve certain problems. They do this for a year, and then everything changes, right? And then suddenly, although it worked well in the beginning, suddenly you're again back to this point where you have all these multi-team projects, and then you need to change again. So typical topics that can become a stream of work, right? So you can, for example, focus on the left-hand side. So you can focus on certain aspects. So you can have, say, we want to have one team that really works on full text search, or we want to have one team that really does auto-suggest or ranking, right? So this is all stuff that you probably also have seen, that I've seen. One team that only focuses on facets and filtering, so on the left-hand side, right? They want to say, we really want to improve this. We want to show the right filters, the most relevant filters for our customers in a way that is most useful for them, and so on. You can work on like basic item selection. So before you go into ranking, right? What is the candidate set for that? You can have topics like size or availability, right? So Zalando, as you know or heard, maybe they have a whole department that just thinks about size, and one sort of search is also an aspect of that, I think. And then you could try to say, okay, we have one team that works on this, and we want to really make it independent. The question is, right? So the idea is to start with this and say, okay, we want to have like, this is one stream of work that I have. I want to have one team that only works on that, right? And then the question is, can you actually technically do that? And usually you can't, because the way your system is set up is different. That's one question. The other question is also, I think, which is very important, is can you have it actually team work on this and its impact being measured independently, right? So sometimes you have a good idea for something that works, but it's sort of so far away from the customer or something that's really hard to measure the impact, and that's also a problem. Right, and the typical problems are, so for example, if we look at ranking, sorting ranking is very deep in the search engine. The impact you might measure, but there might be other activities that distort it, right? So let's say you work on the ranking, but there is another team that works on product presentation, right? Really tries to optimize what you show on the product cards. And then again, you have some dependencies which are not easy to fix. And then filtering, for example, right? So faceting filtering, that's one part. but usually there's also the data intake into the search engine. That's also something you need to consider. And if you take this approach, right, the first would be, okay, let's move everything that the team needs into the team. But this might lead to duplication, or like the team has to have like a huge technical stack it can't measure. So the next question is, after you do this, so what are support teams? What kind of support teams can you have of these three other kinds to support the search teams? Right, and typical candidates for platform complex systems are, of course, the search engine, right? So you could package, you can think about, you have one team that only looks at search, but they have no like business or customer logic, but their task is just to take the search engine and package it in a way that it can be used as a product. Or maybe as a complex subsystem, right? So you say, I mean, it's a very complex piece of technology, so it might not be easy to make it completely self-service, but then you have a team that is only there for other teams, and they can buy and say, we need this, we need that, and then they implement that, right? Or the intake, you could also think about having a team that only does sort of what other teams need and so on. Same for front end, right? So at Zalando for a while, we had like a front end pool, which was working, making changes to the front end for any of the other teams when they needed something. And then candidates for enabling teams, I think, right, you can think about data science. You can either do that, you can have really teams which have data science, but you could also say, let's have like an internal consultancy that teaches other teams how to do data science. And I think same for like search relevance optimization. So everything they need to know how to do that, right? So you can do so, and again, it's not like, so you can also just try and say, we don't do any support structures, the team do that by themselves. But yes, thank you. And one thing I think that's not too, you shouldn't underestimate just how hard it is to build a platform. So there are many challenges there. Yeah, and I think the most thing, so I've never really seen a platform team that really works well, right? So I think it takes a certain kind of a person who really likes to create this internal product. So it's sort of, it's a mix of being technically challenging, but at the same time also very people focused, right? And that's somehow, I think it's hard to find people who like to do both. And the other thing is, of course, so this is much more than just having like Elasticsearch as a service, because so if you really want to have self-service, right? It's like the whole, just look at like intake, enrichment, whatever you have, spell check, synonyms, ranking, all of that, and then the actual search engine, and making all of that configurable for different teams to use, you know, also in a way that is robust. So if they misconfigure something, you would catch it, right? So this is really like, I don't know, you take something like Apache Spark and then you build a self-service for that. So you also have to make sure if people do something that breaks the platform, it doesn't affect everybody and so on, right? So this is quite difficult, but you can also start like with smaller things and try to enable teams to become better at that. So another topic I want to briefly say, so what I've also seen often is that people, because of this technical complexity, right? So in a way, like the search engine is a bit like a monolith. So how do you make sure people can do independent things and they don't get into the way? What people also often try is to replace the search engine or parts of it with microservices, right? So let's say, let's pull out query processing, or let's pull out ranking, right? Let's not use the internal ranking, but let's have a microservice and call that and so on. Let's not like use spell checking within the search engine, but have our own spell checking stuff out there, like a service that just does spell checking and so on. And of course, so you gain a lot of flexibility, right? I mean, everything that microservices promised, and I think they also delivered at least, is then you can just redeploy one part without, you know, teams don't have to align on that. But the other part is, of course, also, so never underestimate, I think you know this very well. So the search engine technology, like literally took years to build, and there is a lot of expertise went into that. So it's not that easy to say, okay, let's just build independent spell checking thing that works well. And the other problem is also because if you do that, it becomes much more like we first do this, but it becomes more of a pipeline. So if you make one mistake, for example, in query processing, if you sort of misinterpret what something means, then things become much harder to fix later, right? Whereas when everything's integrated in the search engine, you can also do it in a way that if I get this right, then something else gets boosted up and then you have a good result again. Yeah, but still, so you can definitely do that. So one thing, so how do you apply all of that? Also, a good recommendation from the book is, I think, so if you remember, there are certain interaction patterns for how these teams interact, right? So for example, like stream-aligned services and platform service should be usually like an X as a service kind of thing. And one recommendation they have is, so if you try to make the change, right? So instead of saying, okay, we make this change, we're going to separate the services, we're going to separate the code bases and so on. The first thing you try to do is change the interaction pattern. So you simulate something like X as a service between the teams, and you see whether it works out, whether it feels right, whether you made the right cut, and then you can do it. And then over time, right? So in the beginning, usually you have something like teams which very closely collaborate, they collaborate less, and then some of them go into this X as a service mode and so on. And then you're on the right path. And it's a never-ending process, as I said, right? So stuff changes over time. A few triggers to look out for is if software becomes too large, speed is dropping, or somehow there's a small set of services and many people rely on them, right? So you have, again, these bottlenecks, and this is something to look out for. And also, I mean, always listen to your people. So in my experience, some of the reorgs also really came from the team saying, you know, this doesn't work for us. I think we actually feel like two teams and so on. Then you should, of course, listen to them. The summary. As I said, so it's just very complex, just technologically. It's not that clear how to do it. I really like this team topologies framework. It's not a very thick book, so it's a good read, I think. And then the process that comes out of that is very, so you always think about streams of work. How would the teams look like if I try to make them all independent, and then how can I add backend support for that? And then there's also a recommendation how to do it. So first try to change the interaction patterns, and then we can move on. All right, and that's my talk. Thank you very much. And I think you still have some time for questions.
Thank you very much for your talk, Mikio. So I think we have like 4 or 5 minutes for questions. There's one. Start was the first one.
Thank you for the talk. You apparently have been working with much more talented teams of engineers than I have.
Okay.
Because there are two huge problems I've observed, both in teams that I've worked with directly and in the customer teams that I've worked with as a product manager for OpenSearch. Closer. So now the microphone will be infected. Search is hard. And my observation is that most general software engineers don't understand the difficult issues. And in your framework, you propose essentially an enabling team, which has the expertise. I think that's the core idea, that this enabling team understands the difficult problems and can go and help other teams get up to speed. I haven't seen that work very well. It seems that hiring managers want generalists, and so getting a generalist software engineer up to speed in search takes a long, long time. How do you deal with this?
Yes. So I think for one thing is, I think this enabling team. So as I said, right, so this are all areas to look into. So I'm not saying you hire generalists and then you teach them how to do search relevance engineering and so on. This is just so you could also say, no, we need to hire the right people already, right? We need to have people who already know how to do it. And I think in an area like search, you definitely also need people who really know how to do search. So it's not, as you say, it's very hard to hire generalists. or to teach them how to do it. But also, I think same for data science, right? I think what also really changes is the way how important it is to work with data and, you know, validate, like have a data-driven way to measure quality and all of that, which is very different from how you do software engineering. Yeah, but I think I think you need to hire more people, and then this enabling really works. Well, yeah, we have to see like how big the gap is and so on. But yeah, I would also think you need to hire people who know how to do search, which are very hard to find, I know. Or power them, or I know, get some external help maybe.
Great, thanks Mikio for the talk as well. In the past, I worked a lot with the team topologies framework and with the different types of teams. And what I always found tedious was this stream of work, because a stream of work is not necessarily a stream of value that is provided to the user or the business. And if we look at a thing that is so well fundamented like search, it's very easy to break it down into the different like feature parts that we see. But we are talking about a structure and like moving a team and even a domain with different teams a step forward. And that is, I think, a high investment and might also take a lot of time and budget. So what do you think about that? And also, like, how do you ensure that you really have a stream of value that you kind of putting up in the architecture of the teams?
Yeah, good question. So I think this, well, I started at the point where you say you already have the stream of work. Somebody thought about this looks like a good stream of work, but how do you get it, right? Yeah, I think, I mean, you often what you do is so you anchor it in some customer problems to make sure that that's true. Yeah, but I also agree what you said. So the problem is always you already have something and then you need to move it around. And that might be, I mean, so the technical implications of making a team change can be very large. I also experienced that myself, right? So you need to, you have some piece of code and then suddenly another team gets it. And then if you don't do it right, they have too much and so on. So this is the...
No, it wasn't, but it fits spot on. So. All right. Thank you very much, Mikio. I think we're at the end of our time.
Yes.
So let's have a 15-minute break, come back 25 past, and let's thank Mikio again.
Okay. Thank you very much.